So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to a bit strange. You remember last year we had the dragon Theo Petitus come and speak to us live. Well, today we're in for a treat. Someone much, much better than Theo. You are in for a treat today. Our guest today is Professor Sir Christopher Evans, OBE, Welsh wizard and truly bonkers prof. Chris is a great pal of mine over the years. What you've got to know about Chris is, first of all, he's Welsh, and that is important for our conversation today. He is a genius scientist, he's a genius entrepreneur, and we're going to have a bit of fun today. So, Chris, first of all, hello.
Tom, fantastic. Great to see you.
So, Chris, let's get right into it.
Yep.
You are, in my opinion, unique because you don't find a scientist and an entrepreneur wrapped up in the same body. And my God, you're both of these things in the one head, which probably makes you as mad as you are. So, can you just tell us, the audience today, Scottish Edge, are entrepreneurs who are starting, who are growing, who are scaling their businesses, and they're just looking for the tips, they're looking for the war stories, they're looking for probably more what went wrong, but of course what went right. So can I take you right back to the beginning? St. Joseph's Primary School, Port Talbot. Now, that wouldn't be known as the hotbed of entrepreneurial scientists in the world. But what happened? What happened?
Well, the thing is, with hindsight, something did happen there. And just being serious for a minute, I mean, I was always a scientist, right, from a very young age. So age of 7, I had a chemistry set, little microscope. I don't know why. It's just like, big family, there was 8 of us, and I was a mutation. I was just a weirdo who was obsessed with bits of science. And I loved rugby, soccer, football, all the sports and all that stuff, drinking with the lads, chasing girls, but I loved science. And I was good at it, was good at science. And so that's all I ever wanted to be when I grew older, was to become a scientist, become a mad professor, as you would say. Funny enough, my aim from the age of 7, because on the chemistry set cover was a picture of someone who was identical to you, Tom. There was like a bald guy with a beard, glasses, in a white coat. And I just wanted to be him. So
I'll go and get my white coat, Chris, yeah.
So I wanted to be a professor, look like Tom. And then so eventually I'll have to shave all my hair and everything together. But so that my aim was always to be a scientist, to discover things that would be good for people and help people. It was just something in my head. So all the way through school, I was doing that. But what I didn't know, but I do know now, is that the whole environment of Port Talbot, which was a little bit tough, as you can imagine, massive, huge industrial town, estate, and the school itself was pretty tough upbringing in the school, all the way around. But it makes you quite resourceful, quite flexible, quite adaptable, and makes you stronger. And all those values kicked in later in my career, which were really important, because if I was just going to be a scientist, I didn't really need those values, because you would just use your intellect in a university, in a laboratory, in the lecture theatre, and be a prof until you're 100 years old. And everyone's saying, oh, he was a clever prof, wrote all these papers. But if you're going to step outside that science box into the financial, commercial world and make products and get them out there, you're going to need those other values of resourcefulness, creativity, toughness, etc., being smart, wily, etc. And that is what I got inherently from my upbringing in Port Talbot, which I didn't know about then. It's taken me many years to realize how useful that was. And the two things were with me. The science, though, I'm afraid, was just there. It was just built in. God thought, you know what, this guy's either going to jail or to a lab. So that he can go to a lab.
And Chris, was there anything in your family, because I know your family, your mum or your dad, that encouraged you that way, Or, because am I right in thinking you were one of 8, but you're the only one who went to university?
No, my brother went to university as well. My older brother went and became a teacher.
Right.
You know, so he was your classic teacher, grumpy all the time, and you know, and just serious and cautious, conservative. And I suppose being the second brother, I was the more reckless one and a bit go faster, etc. But you know, so the rest of the family didn't. They went to factories and they worked like everybody else in Port Talbot, and are still down in Wales. So yeah, but my mother spotted it and my dad, and they nurtured me. You know, they made sure I had whatever I needed to have, you know, in fairness, to do it.
And where was the time that you thought, I want to make money? When was that? So you always wanted to be a scientist, but where did the commercial side kick in, Chris?
Well, I can almost tell you the first minute actually was, so I'd done my O-levels and my A-levels, did my degree, got my first degree, my PhD. I went to America, I did research fellowships, I became a young professor. So I was in chemistry, biochemistry, molecular biology, all that stuff, letters after my name, medals, but I was an academic, I was a scientist. I still had this sort of, I suppose, Port Talbot personality that was coming out even in the labs, right? Or after a laboratory session, I'd go down to the pub in America with all the Americans and sort of hold court, right? But I was a scientist, I was an academic. And I got to be honest, it was in Ann Arbor, Michigan in about I think it was about 1984, something like that, when I saw my prof in a seminar. We had a professor speaker who was absolutely dull as dishwater, right? I mean, I was sitting there going, oh, Jesus, guy, and he gave a seminar. Anyway, at the end, we all clapped, and my prof gave him a brown envelope. I could see it with the dollars sticking out of it. So I just asked him at the end, I said, hey, John, what did you give me? He said, oh, that's his stipend. It's called a stipend. And it was $1,000. I said, what, for that bag of shit? And I said, $1,000. And he said, yeah. I said, so if I give a talk, and although remember, I was not known at all by anybody in the world. And so it was and I just thought, well, I could do with more money. I had very little money as a young prof, very little in the States because it's expensive to live. So I sent out my CV to a load of companies, 8 of them, in fact, and all 8 of them replied to me in writing. There was no emails in those days. And I said, by the way, my costs are $1,000 to speak. And you're going to pay my expenses. They went, yes, no problem. So I went to these companies, got $1,000 off each, give this outrageous talk about science and medicine and whatever. And I got 8 job offers out of 8 from the companies. So then I realized when I sat there in one of them in particular, and they said, how much are you earning now as a young prof? And I said, $24,000 a year. Well, we'll start you on 84. And I was like, goodbye, academic world. It's over.
So that was the moment.
That was the moment. And so it was that prof getting that $1,000 said, you don't have to just be an academic earning very little. You could make some money out of talking. But then by talking, you're actually marketing yourself unwittingly. And it was not my intention. I was on a stage giving it large in California, and the boss comes up at the end, you go, how good was that talk? Everyone, whoa! And he goes, do you want a job? I said, yeah. And that's it. And then I started on that, and in fact, they scaled me up to $118,000 a year in the first year. You can't look back.
Wow.
You're on your way.
So that was it. You were after the greenback after that. So tell us about your first company, how you got into it, and what it actually did.
Yeah, well, I'll do that.
And then give us a little bit of, I mean, I know you've invented so many drugs but maybe some of the stuff like for premature babies is probably the one I know you best for, but maybe you can tell us how you, but just, I think the guys today will want to know about, right, well, how did you get into it? How did you get the money? How did you scale it? How did you, these are all the things that everybody wants to know.
It's good actually, because I mean, I remember more detail about that, which by the way was nearly 35 years ago, right? So,
Yeah.
but I remember the detail of it because you always remember your firsts, your first child, your first birth, your first million, your first everything, right? All the other ones are repeating themselves later, but we could talk about that. But so I was an academic, and so when I took the jobs in the States and in Canada, what I'm doing is working someone's company, and I'm managing quite big teams of scientists, 20, 30 scientists running multiple projects. And I'm the manager or the research manager, research director. And I was poached by an American company in Boston to come back to the UK and run the research labs in the UK, in Maidstone and in Boston. So every month I go to Boston for 1 week, 3 weeks in the UK, but I'm still in a company now. I'm not a university, I'm in a corporation earning good income, but I'm working on projects, loads of ideas which are mine, and I'm giving them to the company for my salary. And they love me. And then this company decided it was going to float, IPO. And I didn't even know what that meant. But when I saw what they were doing, one of the guys in the UK, the director, the chief exec, asked me if I would just meet some investors. I had no idea what an investor looked like, or anything. They came to the offices, and I began talking to these 2 or 3 guys, presented my stuff. Then they asked me to leave. Not the investors. My director said, "Okay, Chris, get out, back in the lab." And one of the investors said, no, stay. And of course, now I understand, when you're presenting to investors to raise money, the investor is king. It is not you. People forget that. And that investor made me stay and talk and talk and talk about everything. And then my directors realized, actually, Chris is quite important to us. Then this guy said, "I'm going to invest in your IPO, 10 million, because I like him." It was as simple as that. And all this went into my head. And I thought, what am I doing? I'm only going to get a pay rise of about $2,000. These guys are going to get 100 million. So my brain was going, but at this stage I was 28 years old. So when I was 29, the following year, I actually resigned from the company politely. I just left. Because I'd written my business plan. I had loads of ideas, and I just took it quite naively on my own. I had no employees, no backers, no investors, no friends, and I actually went to Barclays Bank and said, "Look, I've written this brilliant plan. It'll be worth a fortune. Can I buy a car, or can you give me a loan to buy a car for $5,000, a second-hand Escort?" And they said, "No. And if you don't get out, we'll call the police." Right? So I was 29. So that was a bit of a setback. It was a serious setback. I went home thinking, "Oh, that didn't go well. I actually haven't got any money." So I sold our house, and my new wife, we had no children at the time. I sold the cottage, took the cash, drove to Cambridge, and found this broken down shed laboratory called Babraham, and I built a laboratory in it with the money from my house. So, and we rented a house in Cambridge with their furniture, and me and Anne lived in that house whilst I built this lab with my own money. Then I went out with my plan again, and a friend said, "Come and visit British Sugar." And I thought, what the hell? I said, "You can't make it up, right? A sugar daddy." And he went, "Very funny." So I went to see British Sugar in Peterborough, who'd never invested in anything remotely like me. And there was no biotech companies in the whole of Britain or Europe, right? No one had created, Tom, a startup bio company. So I was Mr. Startup. So British Sugar, anyway, having met them in the space of 3 or 4 days, a brilliant guy called Malcolm Deforge there said, "I like you a lot. There's something about you where it gives me confidence it's all going to work." I said, "Oh, it'll definitely work." And he said, "So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you all the money." Sounds like Theopaphitus, doesn't it? He says, I'm going to give you all the money, which was 1.3 million. And I'm going to sit on the board to control you.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
And so me and him, so I formed this company called Enzymatics in 1987 with the 1.3 million from British Sugar as a minority shareholder. So I kept about 70% of the company, something like that. I think it was 75 there, 25. I managed to persuade them on my valuation, although actually I hadn't done any work. I got nothing had happened yet, but and we kicked that off. And the company's objective was to use all my skills in enzymes, right? Proteins and enzymes and biochemistry to make products for diagnostic kits, to make things, pharmaceuticals, And I created 42 projects in that business plan, and we developed nearly all of them over time.
Did it work, Chris? Did it work?
Yes, it did. And what actually happened within 2 or 3 years, I think it was 3 years, it had got to a valuation of about 20 million. In the first year, we got up to several million of sales, right? Selling the things we made. And one of the things we invented was that lung surfactant, the baby, we could talk about in a sec. But there was a product I made called gamma-lactam, an optically pure molecule for making HIV drugs and other things back in the 80s. And I was the only person in the world who could make it. So I was aware, everyone dreamt about, theoretically, everyone knew what it looked like, and no one in the world had ever made any of it, not even a grain, nothing. It was too complicated to make. Anyway, I figured out how to do it, discovered a microorganism to do it, used the enzymes, made it. Glaxo bought £1 million of it to work on it. A year and a half later, they bought £55 million of it. And you see, the world is changing. Your life changes because of what you do, and etc. But the startup for the audience was really that first 6-12 months was tricky, you know, trying to get that million. I glossed over it quickly, but, you know, it's like, who do you meet? And British Sugar were very interested in my science, applying it to sugar at some stage. Could I convert sugar into things, which I knew I could, but we never really did any of that work. They were more interested in what I was doing, but they invested all the same, and it worked.
So Chris, how did you know to say, right, well, I'm going to raise 1.3, but I'm going to keep 70%? And I mean, because you're a scientist, how did you work out the corporate finance bit of that? Yeah,
actually, that was good, because I'd figured it out, because from my previous companies, I'd watched. Remember, I'd been in an American bioscience, Canadian bioscience, and I'd seen what the board were doing and what the company was doing. Yeah, so I knew mathematically they were raising 50 million, 100 million, and giving away what I said, shares, and I kept trying to work out how were they calculating these values. And then I went to see the finance director there when I was in Canada, and he just showed me, so we come up with these projections of, if our projects are successful, this is the amount of money each project could make back for our company. We discount that back, and that comes to a number. Then investors will discount that again, and that gives them a number. So I did that. I just did that on all 42 of my little project streams. I did masses of calculations. And so I had to give 42 little presentations to British Sugar.
42 discounted cash flow things. Bloody hell, Chris.
Tom, it took me 5 hours. And at the end of it, Malcolm DeFore said, Chris, I'm so exhausted, I'm just going to give you the money.
So you wore him down.
I wore him down.
Right, so you're now in there, and was that the company that invented the premature baby?
Yep. Well, in fact, well, if I jump quickly ahead, that company invented the lung surfactant for premature babies, but it also did this thing called the gamma-lactam and a range of other optically pure molecules, which became, I spun that out, and it became Chiroscience, which eventually became $1 billion company on the stock market. It also, that first company also created the bioluminescent tests for measuring germs more rapidly than anyone in the world. And I spun that out, and that became a company worth 100 million on the stock market, and was sold for 400 million eventually, and so on and so on. But they all came, I had a little company called Enviros, which was spun out from the same first company, and I sold that for 35 million to a private equity firm. And it all came from the first company. And the lung surfactant you talk about, that was sold as well as an individual product to a drug company. But yeah,
just tell us quickly about that one, because maybe there's people in the audience, I mean, they will know someone, because you get stopped in the street, don't you?
Yeah, well, 30 odd years ago in Cambridge, because it was 1989 when we started doing it. And although it wasn't my biggest ever transaction selling it, it's definitely my favorite as well, because premature babies would be born. If they're very premature, they haven't formed enough surfactant in their lungs to breathe naturally for a natural full-term baby. So their lungs collapse, and a lot of them, if they're under 23 weeks gestation, their lungs collapse and they die. They die quite quickly because you can't get oxygen in, and they just suffocate. And that's been known since the beginning of time. And up until we came along, no one could stop it at all. It was just a natural fact of life that they would die, and you had to accept that. But a mad professor, way madder than me, in Cambridge, called Alec.
No, it's not possible, Chris.
Yeah, Tom, this guy was barking, and he was brilliant. And he came to see me, and he said, "Look, you can solve this." I said, "Well, when I understood about it, I realized why you couldn't solve it. It was just too complicated, way, way too complicated." And he said, "Because you're as barking as me. You know, you need to create a massive, long phospholipid molecule, really long, and get it into the lungs of these babies." Anyway, long story short, chemistry didn't work. All the chemists in the world had failed to make it. So I went back to basics and thought, okay, let's do it backwards. Long story, by the way. So we discovered an enzyme in cabbages, because phospholipid is D. We took an ingredient from eggs. We used alcohol, so 0 water. And if you drop the enzyme into alcohol, then you add the ingredient from eggs. Everything spins backwards. And instead of cutting the fatty material into pieces, all the pieces glue together. And we did it in such a way that it glued and formed the natural lung surfactant that would be in the baby's lung. Pulled that out, purified it, like a little milky fluid, and then using a little rubbery syringe. When the baby is born premature, we just poke the little rubber in the throat, squirt the milk in, it go down the lung, saturate the lung, then you take it away. That's all you do. You do it once. And those that survive, and a lot of them did, they'd start breathing. You put them in an incubator, and then, as you say, you get stopped 30 years later in the street by some bloke, "I know who you are. You're my real dad." And it's amazing. It was very flattering, of course. And so we saved many, many thousands of babies quite quickly who just would have otherwise died. It went on to save millions. And now I think there are 10 million premature babies born every year. And of the 10 million, I think there's at least 1 or 2 million are quite very premature. So they're dangerously premature. And they would be getting lung surfactants. And there are dozens of different lung surfactants now. Remember, 30 odd years later, right?
Yeah.
Made, and they're all squirted and given to these little babies. So millions and millions and millions of babies are being saved because a stupid Welsh guy in a shed with some cabbages and eggs.
So I'm fascinated about, you talk about we. So in biotech, what are you looking for when you're building your teams? Because you've got these 2 hats on, so you're employing scientists and corporate finance. So how are you finding people, and how are you building your team?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny that all the things that worked well for me in my first company and my second and third company are exactly the same things today. Nothing has changed, Tom, in 30 odd years. So number one, in a science-based company, your science has got to be good, right? So the idea, the innovation, whatever it is, the discovery, whether it's mine or from another guy in a university, you have to be able to know that is good. And right. By the way, therein is your first mistake. You get that wrong, it's all a waste of time. So assuming you've got that great discovery.
And is that down to you, Chris? Are you the one that says,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, you see, so, yeah, and that is the difference now, because in the early days, it's always been me, sort of thing, but now I'm vastly more experienced and, worldly wise. So I'm pretty good at making a judge. And what I mean by that is that I can look at the science. I understand all the science anyway. And it's like, great, I like that, but I can see whether it can make a product or not. you see, a lot of science can't make a product.
Yeah.
And the product can never be scaled up and can never be sold properly. And so therefore it's just dreamy science. You've got to be able to envisage that product. I was always very good at doing that from the early age. Don't know why. But then you need these people, you need a mix of scientists and managers around in your labs who are like you. You've got to be hard workers. You really got to be. If you got a lazy team, forget it, right? In science, it's a long journey in science. So really smart people who are enthusiastic and highly skilled. So I tend to look, my first company was all graduates, by the way, and some postgraduates. No superstars, just lots and lots of young people, because I wrote all the experiments. So everybody did what I said in the lab. And when they were in the lab, I went out in my fast car selling everything, you know, to companies, to Glaxo and everybody. And then I went raise money. And so I did all three things. But in the lab, you did need all of these smart people, like we saw up in Scotland when I was up there, right? When I go to Glasgow, I give a talk there, I think about 4 years ago, and they got some brilliant stuff going on in Glasgow. You know, in the labs, some good startups, smart people, and they know what they're doing. So you need that, but then you've got to craft a plan, a business plan that shows you can make these products, that you really can make the products from the science, and this team can do it, right? Because the investors, then you got to go and get your money, and the investors, that's when they come in. It's like, well, we like Chris, we know Chris. Even when I was younger, it's like, this guy definitely knows what he's doing, and he's got a great team, but his plan is really pragmatic. It's realistic. He's going to get there. So we'll invest the 1 to 8 million, etc. And then
so Chris, I think that's a really important point for the guys listening today, because we see a lot of business plans in tech where the tech entrepreneurs want to prove they're the cleverest tech people ever.
Yeah.
And I'm always the dumbest tech guy in the room, and I'll say, so what? How are we going to sell it? Who's going to buy it? And what you've said with the science is, you can get the science, great, but what are we going to? You're always thinking, who's going to buy this? And
I did that.
Purpose. And that's really important, I think.
Yeah, it's a crucial point, because a lot of investors used to say to me in the early days, the thing we really like, Chris, about your plans is that I had customer letters. Not a lot of people did this. What I meant is that I'd take my brilliant ideas for products, and I'd visit Glaxo, and I'd visit all the drug companies on my own, and I actually showed them what I was going to create. And they went, well, if you do that, Evans, we'll buy it. And I said, but what do you want? That's what I used to ask them. What, you know, this is what I think is great, but what do you really want? And usually they refined it. I said, Chris,
so you were listening to your customer.
Yep. And then
going back.
Always go and see the customer from the beginning and stay with them right through. And if you don't do that, you're kidding yourself, because you're deluding yourself into, I got this great thing and I'm going to surprise the market with it. And when you come out, the market says, we don't want it. Because it's the wrong shape, wrong size, wrong price, wrong spec. Whilst I come out and something sells for 50 or million because they told me precisely the formulation they wanted, because they couldn't do it. And they told me,
So Chris, something else that struck me listening to you over the years was that these very big pharma companies that be fair to say?
Yeah, that's completely accurate, Tom, because it's changed. You know, 50 years ago, all the drugs in the world, were all made by Big Pharma, all invented by Big Pharma. So Big Pharma would have ideas, and they'd have the odd professors from universities with them, but they'd create it and off you go. Now it's changed. Over 70% of all the things coming out of Big Pharma are being created by small companies.
Right.
Big Pharma is a very smart outfit. So they're able to take those ideas earlier and earlier and earlier and work them up through the laboratories. They then know how to make a product. They know how to sell it, how to manufacture, and they know how to sell it and market it. So some people like me, as you go on the journey, I realize that by taking my stuff later to Big Pharma, I'll make more money. And Big Pharma, they like that. In other words, if I take them what's called the end of a phase 2 trial, because I've got all the data that shows something works brilliantly, they love that. That means Big Pharma know this is going to work now.
There's less risk for them, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. If they take it when it's in preclinical, that means it's never been in man yet. They're taking big risk that it could be dodgy in man, etc. So, but Big Pharma will take them at any stage along that journey because they're looking for clever things all the time. So it's a real symbiotic relationship. All biotech companies in the world, every single one needs Big Pharma. And all big farmers in the world all need biotechs now.
Muck that up, and now I need to go fix it, because I think everybody looks at you and thinks, oh, well, it's all success, but there's never, every entrepreneur I ever speak to has always had big failures as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that go wrong in my world every year, right? I mean, every single year for the last 35 years. So there's 35 examples, Tom, or probably a lot more. But I'm pretty good. It's like having a bike, right? And your tire bursts. If it bursts 3 times in the same year, I'll keep fixing it, and I'll pump it back up, and I'll ride the bike again. What I don't do is throw the bike away because the tires burst. And it's a bit like that. I remember one example. I can give you this because it's an interesting ending. So we created a company developing a very revolutionary cancer drug based on a virus, right, which would disable the virus, herpes virus, and you got stuff in it. And eventually, when you inject it into somebody who's got certain tumors, melanomas, it'll kill the cancer. So we spent about 6 years developing this, and by about 2009, we had spent about 25-30 million, and we were in clinical trials. Things had gone right and wrong, but we now needed to raise at least $50 million. And guess what? This was credit crunch 2009, 8, 9, 10.
I remember.
Right? You remember it, Tom? But for this company, we could raise nothing in Oxford, London and Oxford. And I mean, we couldn't even raise 1 million, right? And the whole team can't do anything. We can't pay the team. By the way, we only had about 1 million left in the bank. So within months, we're dead. We're already trading insolvently. I knew that. It was like, it's all over, right? Because we've only got this one compound. That's the only thing we got. But the thing is, that was me thinking, are we going to fold this fabulous company after all these years, and this pioneering drug? Lots of discussions. And what we did in the end was we sent a scouting party to Boston, talking to people. The guys there said, what you're doing is clever, but you're not American, you're not based here, so you get nothing. So I said, well, let's go there. And I mean, we moved the headquarters immediately to Boston. The chief financial officer moved their families straight away on the airplanes, kids. It was a complete scene of exodus straight. And we went to live in Boston. It then took another 12 months on the bread line in Boston. Like, is this another big mistake, Chris? And we raised that money.
Wow.
Put it in the trial. Now, if that trial didn't work, I mean, this is shit or bust, right? You're down the pan anyway, because you failed in London and you failed in the States, etc. Guess what? That trial worked brilliantly. We saved the lives of a lot of terminal patients. Right. And at the end of the trial, there was a phone call, and a large American pharma company offered and said, so Chris, $1 billion cash for that. So the company was sold. And yet, 2 years before that, it was bankrupt. It was and so you can take your messages from that, Tom. I mean, you don't give up, right? I think somebody once said, life is a colorful journey, right? Pain is temporary. A failure is forever, right? And so don't go there, but the pain, you take it for as many years as it keeps coming, as long as you're believing in what you're doing. And I knew we had something good, but God, we had to find a way, right? Yeah. So that one was an interesting one, because I was at the edge, and I've had a few of them.
But Chris, I would say, looking from the outside, there's a few things going on here. One is that you're very well networked, so you know to go to Boston, and know who to speak to, and when you speak to them, they know you. So you get yourself out there and market yourself. Just usually unknowingly. I know you know it, but you're making these contacts every day of the week. It's a bit harder in lockdown, but you are networking and telling your story and marketing yourself and getting to the right people. And that's a skill in itself, and it's something that is underestimated, I believe.
I think all entrepreneurs have to do that. I don't think you can be an entrepreneur if you don't do that. Particularly in my field in science, as you rightly say, the thing about all science companies, you have to keep raising money. You cannot complete the journey with your own money or all your friends' money. You got to raise real money. You got to meet a lot of people. So you got to get out and out. I actually enjoyed doing it as well. I quite enjoyed just sitting around and telling the story until someone thought, actually, I don't like the story, Chris, but I like you. Some people, I like you and I love the story, right? So you make your own luck. And if they didn't like me or the story, I mean.
So can I bring you up to date? Because for the guys listening today, I would love to get your take on COVID, the science and the opportunity. Because like every entrepreneur, I sit here thinking, okay, it is bad, so we've got to sort out what we're doing. But my goodness, there's so much opportunity going to come from this, because nobody has been through this before. No. And therefore, I believe there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur, because this agility to think differently, to try things, to fail, to try another thing, it's an entrepreneur's time, in my opinion. But could you maybe talk about just a little bit about how you think it's going to play out in terms of vaccines and the science, and then how you see opportunity here, Chris?
Yeah, I think, first of all, luckily, nearly all the things I said back in early April, so when this pandemic exploded in March, it was end of March, it was really April and May in the UK. I did a couple of radio interviews, where you get asked by the BBC or whatever it is, Chris, it's all doom and gloom. We have no drugs, we have no vaccines, we have nothing. And I explained then that there were 50 odd drugs being worked on, and there were 50 vaccines in early development. Now there are 150 different vaccines in development, right? And there are 12 quite mature front runners, like the Oxford one, the Imperial one, the one in America, Moderna, the German one, Pfizer one, etc., Glaxo. So they are front runners, but more important than the vaccines for me, and I said this back in April, is that if you wait for the vaccines, and that's all you're going to get, you possibly are going to die. And since I said that, 46,000 people did die, and they died not because of the vaccine, because there was no drugs to save them. Drugs are different to vaccine, the actual pharmaceutical. You need something that kills the virus or pushes the virus load inside your system down, and you need something that controls the damage the virus has done to your body, which is this huge inflammation effect that it causes, a cytokine storm. And now those drugs were being developed, and now we have a series of them. Remdesivir, I think, is a very good drug for getting in early. If it was dirt cheap, I would say anybody who's got symptoms and is struggling a little bit when they arrive in hospital, they should be injected with remdesivir, because I think it'll knock the viral load back. then they should go on to one of the steroid hydrocortisone or dexamethasone. So you've got these drugs, because should they go a bit further with a respirator mask on, the inflammation can be controlled and subdued, and they stand an excellent chance of coming back out quite quickly from the hospital. And then they can wait for the vaccine should they need it. But by then they would have vaccinated themselves because of the infection. You would have produced your own antibody, etc. So I think there's a lot of hope. Next spring, next summer, I think there'll be several of these vaccines in huge numbers of late stage trials, and would have come out of trials. They would have finished, and they'll be injected into hundreds of thousands of humans. So because you're going to know that's a good population safety trial. And I have a feeling if one doesn't work so well, you combine it with another one.
Right.
You know, like MMR, you have 2 or 3 vaccines combined. So I'm quite optimistic that throughout 2021, by the end of 2021, there'll be a little package of vaccines which together will work. Now, scaling that to make 8 billion or dare I say it, 20 billion vials to treat everyone in the world more than once in case you need to give it twice, that's a big, huge problem. Bill Gates has explained that brilliantly, better than me. So, but at least the cavalry would have arrived, and now you've got to get organized. The good news is there are more drugs coming through, so more and more people should not see, should this wave that's happening now in Britain get worse in October, November, which it probably will, and becomes nasty, I can't see why we should have a lot of deaths.
Right.
We may have a lot more people going to hospital soon, but they should be coming out quickly. Going in, because the NHS has got lots of PPE, people like me supplied lots of PPE, ventilators, lots of ventilators, they're well organized, and they got drugs, they got ammunition. So I would be more optimistic about being looked after I wouldn't get too worried, scared to death anymore about COVID. And I don't believe we should lock down the whole economy again. I think the government's doing its best. There may have to be local pockets locked down when there's a breakout, but do it for a short time, then open it up again,
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about the unintended consequences of lockdown is that cancer patients are not being diagnosed nor treated. And I certainly believe that the number of cancer-related deaths is going to be more than the COVID deaths.
Way more.
Because we've shut down. So it's lockdown is a very blunt instrument to deal with this.
Tom, I mean, even as we are talking, today, there'll be about 400 cancer deaths today. Nothing like COVID, right? And 1,000. Here's the thing: 1,000 new people would get cancer today, and 1,000 new people will tomorrow. And what we used to know is that they get diagnosed. That's how you know that number. Now we're not diagnosing them, because they're not going into hospital to be screened. So there's a huge backlog of an unknown quantity of undiagnosed cancers and untreated cancers. So the death rate is going to increase next year. It's worrying.
So I mean, the big message there for MD listening to us is don't say, oh, I don't want to bother the NHS. Go and get it checked out, for goodness sake.
Oh, you got to.
So listen, I want to end on a high, because that's a little bit serious there. So everybody's sitting in the audience, trying to grow their business, trying to scale their business, trying to make a difference. They're all passionate. So what's your advice? What's your advice?
Well, as you said, what a great time to do it, right? Don't be scared off that. Some people say, oh my God, because of COVID, no one's investing. Well, that's the point. No one's investing. The pile-up of cash is enormous. I mean, like when the Hut Group floated, yesterday, it was like a riot, 30% premium. Everybody wants to back something good. So if you've got a good little idea, good little project, good little business plan, good group of people, then, you can raise money. There's a lot of people who've been sitting around for 8 months with money, not able to go and visit people to invest money, right? So I think there's a lot of money ready to invest. and people are looking for creative, energetic people to get on and bring this back. And boy, Boris is going to need all the young entrepreneurs of Britain to rebuild this economy, right? So it's not just us old boys being smart about what we're doing. You need all these youngsters in these startups. I think it's a great time. You know, as I mentioned, you know, I lived through when I did my first company was in '87, was the Great Storm, and everything had gone round about then. But I went out and raised my money that day of the Great Storm. The 1.odd million British sugar was that day. You lived through the credit crunch, which was all biotechs were discounted 90% across the world, right? And you know what? I didn't stop doing anything. I just kept fighting in the trenches. It was a constant trench war for years. And you come out one at a time with each of the companies still alive. And I could give you one quick example, right, of a little trench. There's a company I built called Lab 21 and Microgen, and I bundled these companies together. Anyway, in diagnostic testing, got up to about 20 million sales, put it on AIM. Tom, it never got bigger than about 15 million pounds on AIM, right? So it's not a failure, but it's not a big success by any means. It's not even really successful. And that was during the 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Bumbled along, and it's bumbled from 2013 to 2020. In January 2020, it had already merged a few years ago with a third little outfit, and it renamed itself Noversight PLC on AIM. Still worth 18 million pounds. It just happened to have a brilliant molecular test. All its diagnostic tests were clever molecular tests for different pathogens, and it had one for COVID. And the government bought it. Its valuation today is 400 million. Right? I'm glad I kept some shares, right? I was the chairman. I founded the bloody company, right? The company was one of the biggest suppliers of the reagents for COVID PCR testing around the world, around Britain. And yet, it was in the trenches in 2008, 9 and 10 where it should have died of trench foot in the mud. Right? But people like that keep them alive. So the message to all the young startups, it doesn't get any worse than that, right? Where no one wants you, all your value's discounted, you're running out of money, and there's no one to give you money, because in 2008 and 9, the guys with the money had run out of money. So you've got to still stay with it. As I said, pain is temporary, and failure is forever. So the message is, don't give up on your dream. But if you don't share your dream with the customers, your dream may become a nightmare, right?
Well, Chris, I think that is a brilliant note to end on. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you, and I've learned a lot today, and I've known you for 20 years. But good luck to you. I hope you're working on some of these vaccines and how we're going to live with COVID.
I am.
I think the big message to everybody is this is the time of the entrepreneur.
It is.
We must be bold. We must get on with it. And I'm very proud that up in Scotland, we've got Scottish Edge to help. So thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to you, Chris. We'll see you soon. All the very best.
Cheers, Thank you, Tom. Bye, everybody.